After being killed in a fire, I opened my eyes and found myself at the wedding scene with my wife and child. This time, my wife chose her childhood sweetheart who had just returned to the country and decided to marry him. She was extremely disgusted with me, kicked me out of the company, and let her childhood sweetheart take over. I won't marry a good-for-nothing. What's more, he's just a dog in the Ryan family. As a result, after the childhood sweetheart took over Bayshon Company, the company lost bids one after another and even got involved in a murder scandal. My wife came to beg me again, but this time it was to ask me to take the blame for her childhood sweetheart. Seeing that I was unwilling, she tried to exact repayment for the kindness she had shown me before. But I laughed wildly, looking at my wife who had been reborn with me. The kindness of the Ryan family was already repaid by me in my last life. Now, it's you who owe me. Look for her. Go and look for her. If you can't find Scarlett today, I'll skin you alive. I opened my eyes and saw an enraged Mr. Ryan in front of me. The knife wounds on my body were still aching faintly. But when I looked down, I found that there were no wounds on my body at all. It seemed that being hacked to death by the victim's family members at the entrance of Bayshon Company was just an illusion. Seeing that I looked dazed, Mr. Ryan became even angrier and directly grabbed the walking stick beside him to smash it at me violently. Bang! The walking stick hit the wall behind me, which completely brought back my sanity. I looked around and was certain that I must have returned to the wedding scene. Mr. Ryan was still pointing at me and cursing, and the words of the surrounding guests surrounded me. I always said that an adopted son can't be relied on. He doesn't even know to look for his wife when she runs away. What adopted son? Look at his cowardly look. To put it bluntly, he's a live-in son-in-law. Scarlett disappeared? My brows furrowed tightly, and huge waves of shock were stirred up in my heart. In my last life, Scarlett and I got married smoothly. But on our wedding night, she gave herself to Blake. I caught them red-handed, but she threatened me with the kindness she had shown me before and silenced me. Now that she suddenly disappeared, unless she, like me, had been reborn. But before I was hacked to death, Scarlett had already taken away all the working capital and eloped with Blake. Could it be that they also had an accident? The pain of being betrayed was like a shadow following me. I took a few deep breaths before I could barely hold myself up. The only thing I was certain of was that their elopement had cut off my only chance to survive. Before I could figure it out, I heard a familiar voice. I looked up and saw the disappeared Scarlett. She was walking towards me with Blake on her arm. Her neck was covered with hickey marks, and her red lips still had the marks of water that hadn't dried yet. I won't marry a good-for-nothing. What's more, he's just a dog in the Ryan family. Scarlett put the wedding ring on Blake's finger in front of everyone and announced that he was her groom. I sneered in my heart. Her actions made me certain that only Scarlett had been reborn. If Blake had been reborn, he would never get involved in the mess of Bayshon Company no matter what. There was disdain in her eyes. When she walked up to me, her disgust reached its peak. After today, you resign voluntarily and hand over all your duties to Blake. There was a mocking smile on Blake's lips as he taunted me and said, "Don't take it too hard. Scarlett just trusts me." Facing their sarcasm and ridicule, I didn't care. I looked past them at the small figure behind them. That was Bella, the child of Scarlett and me. In my last life, she died in a pool of blood with me. Bella was looking at me with hatred, with a maturity that didn't match her age. She took the initiative to hold Blake's hand. Uncle Blake is a doctor who returned from studying abroad, while Ryan is just an undergraduate. It's only natural that Mom trusts Uncle Blake. As soon as he finished speaking, I was certain that Bella had also been reborn. These words were like the final blow that broke my spine, making me completely give up on this child whom I had held in the palm of my hand. Clearly, in my last life, I was hacked to death by random knives in order to protect Bella, who was still in Bayshon Company. But she still hated me. When I was on my deathbed, Bella whispered in my ear, "If my real father were here, he would surely be able to protect me." Thinking of this, I couldn't suppress the sneer in my throat and spread my hands to answer. "It's only natural that you change your marriage partner. After all, the child must be with his real father. But remember this time it's I who initiative break off the engagement. I think you're dirty. These words were like a thunderbolt on a clear day, causing an uproar in the whole place. Scarlett's eyes were red. If someone hadn't stopped her, she would have wanted to skin me alive and tear out my tendons. You, a stray dog begging for mercy in the Ryan family, think I'm dirty? Do you deserve to say that? The way she looked at me was no different from looking at a dog that could be ordered around at will. After calming down a bit, Scarlett looked at me coldly. Regardless of whose child he is, Bella is my child, a child of the Ryan family. I pursed my lips, with a lingering bitterness in my mouth. Calculating Bella's age, I could even figure out when Scarlett got pregnant with Bella. This was our make-up wedding. Scarlett and I got our marriage certificate 5 years ago. That night, Scarlett and I invited our respective friends to a party. Halfway through the party, I found the two of them having an affair in the bedroom. I could hear everything clearly standing at the door. I couldn't make up my mind to enter the room, nor did I dare to leave, for fear that others would know that my wife had cheated on me right after we got married. Only after the sounds inside the door stopped did I push the door open and enter. I still remember the words Blake used to humiliate me. He put his head on Scarlett's shoulder. "Isn't this your husband?" Scarlett was wrapped in a quilt, with a lot of her body exposed. She didn't even look at me and directly ordered, "My clothes are all torn. Go and buy me a set." I don't remember how I bought the clothes and sent them over at that time. All I remember is that my body and soul were separated, extinguishing all my emotions. I had already repaid the kindness of the Ryan family with my life. In this life, I would only live for myself. With the support of the eldest daughter of the Ryan family, Blake put his arm around Scarlett and echoed, "Since things have come to this point, you should take the initiative to file for divorce. And leave the house empty-handed." The two of them were singing in harmony, clearly intending to kick me out of Bayshon Company without paying any price. The anger in my heart had turned into an erupting volcano, but I kept my face calm. Leave the house empty-handed? Of course I can leave Bayshon Company, but I want to take away what belongs to me. Aren't you always wanting to take control of Bayshon Company? I can sell you the shares in my hand. Hearing that I was willing to sell my shares, Scarlett's eyes lit up. What they originally wanted was to make me leave Bayshon Company, and being able to get the shares in my hands was already an unexpected bonus. After all, as long as she could completely control Bayshon Company, she could, with the memories of her past life, develop the company better and better. I don't have the ability to read minds, but I could tell from her expression. I sneered in my heart, mocking Scarlett for having the wrong idea. In my last life, she attributed the bankruptcy of Bayshon Company to my wrong decisions, multiple failed bids, and even the purchase of inferior building materials, which led to the collapse of buildings and the destruction of years of hard work. Yet she didn't realize at all that the real cancer was standing right beside her at this moment. Once Blake entered Bayshon Company, soon the stock price of Bayshon Company would plummet to the bottom and eventually become worthless. I was selling my shares in advance now to get enough cash in hand. Blake looked very excited. He whispered to Scarlett for a moment and finally made up his mind. "Sure, but you can only get half of the normal share price." Hearing this, even Mr. Ryan frowned. I walked up to Scarlett, pulled her aside, and whispered in her ear, "You know very well how many dirty and messy things have been going on in Bayshon Company over the years. If you don't want a total breakdown, don't haggle with me here." Scarlett's eyes were full of suspicion. She should be suspecting that I had also been reborn. But after looking me up and down, she didn't notice anything unusual about me. She snorted coldly and agreed to my terms. "Get out of here as far as you can after you get the money. Don't let me see you again. Bayshon Company has been neither dead nor alive in your hands for so many years. When Brother Blake enters Bayshon Company, he will surely make Bayshon a leader in the industry." No matter when, Scarlett always had unrealistic confidence and trust in Blake. But when it came to me, her childhood sweetheart, she didn't have the slightest bit of trust. She seemed to have forgotten that I was also admitted to graduate school back then. It was because Bayshon Company was on the verge of bankruptcy that I voluntarily gave up my path of further education. There was a heavy feeling in my chest, as if a huge rock was pressing on it, and the gloominess was almost unbearable. I stared straight at Scarlett, trying to see the shadow of the past on her face. It was my day and night efforts, my toil day in and day out, and my numerous business dinners that led to gastric bleeding, hospitalizations, and surgeries. That was how I pulled Bayshon Company back from the brink of bankruptcy. But Scarlett could so easily deny everything about me with just a few words. I finally understood. It wasn't that Scarlett didn't know how to love, she just never loved me. We signed the contract on the spot. When I left, Bella was still standing there spitting at me. Useless loser. Ryan is really a useless loser. In my past life, years of my upbringing had no effect on Bella. He only wanted to call me Ryan. Now it seems that it was due to genetics. He had disgusting blood in him. I never would have thought that. The last time I came to Bayshon Company was to bring my divorce agreement. Scarlett and Blake were both not in the company. Since that day, the two of them had gone abroad on their honeymoon. However, although they were indeed not in the company, I could hear their names from the mouths of the employees all the way. What on earth is the background of the new vice president? Why did he change our working hours as soon as he came? I don't know about other things, but he definitely doesn't understand any business. He only knows how to take advantage of us ordinary employees. All the way, what I could hear were the employees' complaints about these strange regulations. I put the divorce agreement on Scarlett's desk. When I opened the door to leave, I saw Carter waiting for me at the door. Carter was my assistant and also my most trusted confidant in this company. In my last life, he disappeared mysteriously. It wasn't until the building contracted by the company collapsed that I found his body. At that time, the company was exposed for using inferior building materials, and the news spread rapidly after being reported by online influencers. I was pushed out as a scapegoat to bear the blame, and I was powerless to investigate Carter's cause of death. Now, Brother Ryan, look. Carter handed me his phone to show me the chat records between him and Blake. After I left, he was responsible for handing over my business. On the chat interface, there were numerous work messages sent by Carter, but Blake hadn't replied to any of them. She doesn't reply to my messages, but she still posts those travel and leisure moments as usual. Brother Ryan, are you really willing to hand the company over to them? Bayshon Company is your hard work. Facing Carter's question, I shrugged and said helplessly, I have no choice. I've already sold all my shares. Bayshon Company has nothing to do with me now. There was a sly smile on Carter's face as he whispered, others may not know, but I do. You must have already found a place to go. I gave a mysterious smile and didn't give a direct answer to Carter's question. Success is achieved through secrecy. Longshan community is the largest community that could be contracted in recent years, with a total of 7 phases. Bayshon couldn't handle it all at once, so it had to split the profits with Tianjin and each undertake a part. When Mr. Ryan founded Bayshon, it had already been a sworn enemy of Tianjin. And it was by using Longshan community as a stepping stone that I entered Tianjin. I promised to make Bayshon give up the contracting rights of Longshan community within 3 months. It was summer now. When I entered the construction site dormitory, my clothes were already soaked with sweat. During these 3 months, I would go to the area contracted by Bayshon from time to time. After all, I really couldn't remember exactly when that worker had the accident. Back then, a worker accidentally fell into the cement and died. To avoid compensation, Blake forcibly suppressed this matter. When the truth finally came to light, he directly shifted the blame onto me, and I was forced to hold a press conference to apologize. I remember that this worker had a daughter who was desperate to find out the truth about her father's death and gradually became an online influencer. Relying on the power of the masses, she finally uncovered the truth. Whether I came to patrol or not was not only to avoid the death of workers but also to completely crush Scarlett and Blake with the help of the worker's daughter. However, I wasn't exactly clear about the specific time of the worker's death either. Ryan, why are you here? After another fruitless search, just as I was about to leave, I heard someone calling my name from above. I looked up and saw Bella standing on the steel bars on tiptoe. It had only been a week since we last met. His clothes were tattered and his face was dirty, looking just like an orphan. I guessed that Scarlett had taken Blake abroad and couldn't take care of Bella. "Why are you here? Why aren't you at school?" Bella curled his lips and looked at me with contempt. "I'm the future heir of Bashan. Why should I go to school and be with those poor people? I knew I wasn't your child. Have you ever smelled yourself? You reek of poverty all over." He pretended to be about to retch. I was a bit speechless. I couldn't even imagine how Scarlett usually educated Bella to have developed such a character. I shook my head, not intending to say much more to him. "Ryan, you're not allowed to leave. Stay and play with me." It was still in a commanding tone. I was about to leave on my own when Bella roared at me. "You're a servant in the Ryan family. How dare you not listen to me?" He was so angry that he jumped up and down on the steel bars, not noticing the danger at all. Mom was right. You don't know how to be grateful at all. You're a bastard with no parents. Before he even finished saying the word bastard, I turned around and saw Bella slip and fall straight down. Pfft! A steel bar pierced through his chest and blood gushed out. Bella reached out his hand to me, with only terror left in his eyes. He begged. "Dad, Daddy, save me." It was the first time he had called me Dad, but it was too late. I didn't stop walking. I just dialed the emergency number and watched as Bella was taken away by the ambulance. This was the last bit of kindness I could offer. When he was being carried onto the ambulance on a stretcher, Bella's eyes were fixed on me. He murmured, why didn't you save me? Obviously, you used to remind me to be careful of danger. Why this time?" For the first time, I saw panic in Bella's eyes. He begged me to accompany him to the hospital. I slowly pulled his hand that was holding mine away and grinned. "I'm not your dad. Go find your real dad." That night, I was a bit restless. I was awakened by the crying outside the dormitory. After getting dressed, I walked out of the dormitory with a flashlight. By the cement truck not far away, I saw a crying girl. She didn't look very old and seemed to have just entered college. I panicked and hurriedly ran to her side. When I saw her face, my breathing stopped for a moment. It was Ava. All kinds of thoughts flooded my mind. Could it be that her father had already had an accident? I handed her a pack of tissues. When Ava saw me, she was extremely surprised, but then it quickly turned into disgust. "Want me to keep quiet? I tell you, it's impossible." She stared at me stubbornly, hatred surging in her eyes. "I know who you are, but I will definitely make those who killed my father pay the price." I looked at her and, in a trance, she overlapped with the woman who dealt a fatal blow to Bashan in my last life. However, the current Ava was a bit immature. But with a little training, she could become a pawn in my hands. "I'm not here to stop you. Do you want to make those who killed your father pay the price?" Ava was slightly stunned and then nodded vigorously. I laid out my plan to her and called Carter to ask him to cooperate with my plan, with both inside and outside support. In just a week, the cement killing case on the construction site was on the hot search. In the video, Ava was in tears, vehemently denouncing the inaction of Bashan Company, saying that her father's death was a complete murder. Not long after Ava's father died, his body was soon found in the unfinished building. With both witnesses and evidence, Bashan began to collapse for the first time. The next day after the matter fermented, there was a loud knocking on my dormitory door. As soon as I opened the door, I was slapped by the furious Scarlett. Before I could recover, she pointed at me and angrily scolded. "Ryan, what do you mean? Are you going to stop until you kill Blake? It's just that a person died. People die on construction sites all the time. Do you have to stir up trouble?" Scarlett was furious and slapped me again. The fragile inside of my mouth was filled with the smell of blood. I lowered my eyes. "Isn't Blake reaping what he sowed?" He insisted on covering up this matter. Could it really be covered up? "Don't you know better than I do how that worker actually died?" Scarlett became even angrier at what I said. She knew that I was the one pushing things behind the scenes, but she only thought that I was jealous of Blake. She was certain that if it could be covered up in the last life, it could be done in this life too. And in the last life, she pushed me out to quell the public outcry. I was forced to kneel at the entrance of the company for 3 days and 3 nights, being spat on by thousands of people. Scarlett forcibly suppressed her inner anger and reached out to gently touch the red palm print on my face, but I dodged it. She gritted her teeth and said softly, "Just consider it as repaying the kindness of the Ryan family. Help me take the blame for Blake. I promise you can come back to the company as the president after you get out. I found someone to take care of things. You won't suffer in prison." With that, Scarlett didn't care whether I agreed or not. She grabbed me and was about to drag me out of the dormitory door. I stood still, my heart completely turning into ice. I stared intently at the agitated Scarlett and said in a low voice, "The kindness of the Ryan family was already repaid by me in my last life. Now, it's you who owe me." Scarlett seemed to have her throat choked by fate. In just a moment, she lunged at me, looking fierce. "On purpose? You did it on purpose? You ruined me in the last life, and now you want to harm me again in this life." Even now, she was still convinced that it was I who replaced the building materials with inferior ones and that I was the one who had harmed her. Bella was hurt so seriously. "You did that on purpose too, didn't you? If anything happens to Blake, I'll make you pay with your life." Scarlett, as usual, pushed all the blame onto me without hesitation. I took a few steps back and revealed Ava, who had been hiding behind me all along. She was holding a selfie stick with a mobile phone on it that was recording. "Everyone, look. This is the murderer." Scarlett stood there, her face gloomy. Due to the phone that was recording, in the end, she could only give me a hateful look and then turned around and left. "Beishan will withdraw from the construction of Longshan community and will give sufficient compensation to the victims. This incident is entirely due to the ineffective supervision of the general manager. We have already filed an appeal and will give everyone a satisfactory result." The TV in the room was broadcasting the report. Scarlett was full of seriousness, and with just a few words, she defined the nature of this incident. She couldn't bear to see her first love get hurt a little bit, and the general manager became their scapegoat. The abandoned general manager was standing beside me, and the materials he had brought out were placed on the table, a thick stack. "General Manager Ryan, is it true that you'll give me 1 million? I didn't answer. Instead, I first flipped through the materials in front of me, which were about Beishan's bid for a certain commercial building later. It was also this bidding that led to Carter's death. The profit of this commercial building project was more than half, but it still wasn't enough to pay off Blake's gambling debts. In order to obtain more profits, he took risks by using inferior building materials, which led to the collapse of the building and numerous casualties. Carter discovered that he was using inferior building materials and was forcibly drowned in the cement. After the collapse of that building, Carter's body was finally found. The horrible scene of Carter's death was still vivid in my mind. I couldn't help but shudder and then looked at the general manager. "Of course I can give you the money, but you have to do one more thing for me." I stared intently and instructed the general manager to reveal to Scarlett that I was determined to win this bidding. And I asked him to set a trap for Blake, making Blake owe more gambling debts. Those gambling debts would drive Blake into a corner and force him to follow the same path as in the previous life. After the general manager left, Ava, who was standing aside, frowned and asked me, "Do you really want to compete with them for this bidding? Although you've been promoted now, you don't have such great power, do you?" After Beishan withdrew, I successfully entered Shenzhen and obtained a not low position. Facing Ava's question, I chuckled and replied, "Blake won't give up this bidding." Now that Beishan was already on the decline, if Scarlett wanted to turn the situation around, she definitely wouldn't miss this bidding. She was reborn with me, so naturally she knew how lucrative the profits inside were. In the bidding conference room. When I entered the conference room, Blake and Scarlett had already submitted their bids. Blake had a confident smile on his face, while Scarlett just gave me a cold glance. As soon as I submitted my bid, I received a message from Scarlett on my phone. I tell you, for this bidding, Beishan is determined to win. So what if you're reborn? Without Beishan, you're just a good for nothing. Scarlett was certain that I would compete with her, not knowing that the price in my bid was even lower than that of Beishan in the previous life. After the bidding ended, I noticed that the smile on Blake's face disappeared. When I came out of the toilet, I happened to bump into him making a phone call at the door. Give me a little more time. I'll have the money to pay you back soon. My wife is the president of Beishan. Even if I run away, can Beishan run away? Perhaps the person on the other end of the phone relented, and Blake hung up the phone with a dark face. He looked up and saw me standing in front of him, so he became even more annoyed. Blake deliberately bumped into my shoulder and said hatefully in my ear, "Do you think I'll just let it go about what happened to my son? Just you wait. I'll get back at you for what happened to Bella and in Longshan, with interest." I shrugged, feeling that Blake's threat to me seemed extremely feeble. Buzz, buzz. I looked at my phone. It was a message from Ava. "Carter has gone to the building materials market with those people. Do you want to come too?" So fast? The bidding result would come out in about 3 days, and Blake had already started sending people to look for suitable inferior building materials. It seemed that what I had instructed the former general manager to do before, he had done it properly. Blake had a heavy gambling addiction. In the last life, the company's bankruptcy was closely related to his gambling addiction. Before, it was because of my hard work in Beishan that the bankruptcy came later. Now that Scarlett thought she could handle everything and Blake owed more gambling debts, she became even more anxious. It's not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. I looked at the address sent by Ava on my phone and sneered. The day when they would be punished was not far away. Beishan Company won the bidding for the commercial building project as it wished. Some time later, under Bella's earnest begging, I went to see him in the hospital for the first time. The hospital was filled with the smell of disinfectant. Bella's face was pale, but his wounds had healed quite a bit. Bella looked at me eagerly, with an attachment in his eyes that I had never seen before. Daddy, you've finally come to see me." Even though I heard Bella calling me Dad, I remained unmoved. As far as I knew, during the time Bella was hospitalized, neither Scarlett nor Blake had come to see him once. Just like in the last life, when the two of them eloped and left, they didn't take Bella with them either. And I, the only one who chose to protect him, was judged by Bella as unworthy of being his father. During the time in the hospital, Bella would share his hospital life with me from time to time. Sometimes, he would also wonder why I didn't love him as much as I did in the last life. As time passed, Bella himself had an idea in his mind. Bella held my hand, and tears streamed down his face. "Dad, it was all Bella's fault before. Bella really knows he's wrong. Please forgive me." Just then, the door of the ward was kicked open violently. Blake was extremely angry. Seeing my hand held by Bella, he was so angry that he laughed instead. "Ryan, Carter was your man. Don't you think you should give me an explanation? I know you're jealous of me, but Beishan has just got such a big order. Are you determined to ruin it?" The last sentence was shouted out by him. Scarlett followed behind him, her brows filled with anger. "I knew it. You're still thinking about those inferior building materials. An orphan is an orphan. A person without parents will go astray sooner or later." Carter was tied up by the people behind Blake and thrown directly into the ward. There was still wet cement on him. His mouth was sealed with tape. I was just about to untie it for him when I was blocked by the bodyguards. Blake had a smug smile on his face, as if he thought he had me completely under his control. "The police will be here soon. You'd better think about how to explain it to the police then. Using inferior building materials is no small matter. You might end up spending several years in prison." I wasn't as flustered as the two of them expected. Instead, I stood there with my arms folded, looking completely at ease. "Scarlett, God must be blind to let you have a second chance. Do you really think that as a person who was driven out of Beishan, I could pull off such a big scheme just with a few confidants left in Beishan? A flash of panic crossed Blake's eyes, but it was only for a moment. He took out some photos from his pocket and scattered them in front of me. There were photos of the general manager coming to see me, along with a large transfer transaction record. What about adding a general manager? Is that enough? I bet you arranged the death of that worker before too. Scarlett didn't expect that I had private contacts with the general manager. Now she completely believed what Blake said. She was furious, as if Bashan had been ruined by me. Ryan, I could let bygones be bygones regarding the accidental death of that worker before. And I could also consider that you were just angry when you brought Ava to smear the reputation of Bashan. But why on earth would you use inferior building materials again and again? What have we in the Ryan family ever done to wrong you? I shook my head and denied it. I told you, it wasn't me. Even now, you're still lying. Just as we were in this confrontation, the police pushed open the door of the ward. Comrade Police, it's him. He's the one who used the inferior building materials. Scarlett, as if seeing her savior, tried to drag me away with the police. However, the police seemed to turn a deaf ear. Instead, they put handcuffs on Blake first. You're suspected of using inferior building materials. Come with us. Ava was following behind the police. She had obtained authorization and was currently doing a live broadcast. Blake was extremely bold in using inferior building materials. Now the higher-ups also wanted to make an example of someone, and Blake became the target for that. As soon as Blake was handcuffed, all his arrogance disappeared. He almost collapsed on the ground, murmuring, "I can't go to prison. I can't go to prison. They won't let me off." He looked around and finally pinned his hopes on Scarlett. He was almost on his knees begging, "Scarlett, save me, save me." He pointed at Bella, who was still on the hospital bed, and cried pitifully, "We still have a child. If I go to prison, the child will have no father." Scarlett was a bit hesitant. She stood in front of the police and said urgently, "You've really got the wrong person. Blake is a business talent who just returned to the country. How could he possibly do something that would ruin his own future?" The two police officers holding Blake looked at each other. One of the younger ones said, "We've already collected sufficient evidence. Moreover, Mr. Blake here has no record of going abroad in recent years." As soon as these words were spoken, the whole ward fell silent. Scarlett couldn't believe what she had heard. She staggered back and stared blankly at Blake. Blake lowered his head, not daring to look at Scarlett. Ava had a satisfied smile on her face. The death of her father was closely related to Blake. Now seeing Blake being brought to justice was like letting out a long-held grudge. I helped Carter up, tore the tape off his mouth, and patted his clothes. Carter took a few deep breaths and finally recovered. "That bastard almost buried me in the cement too." Fortunately, Ava came in time. She was doing a live broadcast, and Blake was afraid of causing more trouble, so he just tied me up and brought me here. He took out a disc from his pocket, which recorded the transactions of Blake buying and selling inferior building materials. By this time, the commercial building project of Bashan had reached a point of no return. Even though Blake knew he would be discovered, he still took a chance. He chose the same means as in the previous life. As long as he got rid of all the people who knew the truth, he could get through this safely. I glanced at Blake, who was sitting blankly on the floor, and a cold smile curled up on my lips. "Blake, now that things have come to this, do you have anything to say?" The phone in Ava's hand was still broadcasting live, but Blake was already in a state of giving up, with a ferocious look on his face. "Ryan, what are you so proud of? You've raised my child for so many years and worked so hard to pull Bashan back from the brink of bankruptcy. In the end, it'll still be a bargain for me." Bella, who was sitting on the hospital bed, struggled to get up and wanted to refute Blake. "No, it's not like that." I crouched down first, looking straight at Blake, and said word by word, "Benefit you? Do you really think you can still get out? After taking over Bashan, how many people have you buried? How many souls are on your conscience? Can you even count them?" Blake was taken away by the police, and Scarlett stayed in the ward, trying to make a last-ditch effort. You knew all along? She looked at me in silence, then burst into tears as she laughed. You plotted against me. We've been married for years, and you actually plotted against me. Ryan, after all this scheming, aren't you just after Baishan? Don't you just want to take Baishan away from the Ryan family? I knew you had wild ambitions. You definitely wouldn't be willing to be a live-in son-in-law for the rest of your life. I was stunned. Even now, Scarlett still thought I was after Baishan. After the incident of using inferior building materials was exposed, Baishan would go bankrupt even faster than in the previous life. I wasn't after Baishan. I just wanted those who had let me down to pay the price. I know you hate me and resent me. But Blake couldn't have done such a thing. He wasn't with me for the money. After Blake was taken away, Scarlett seemed to have lost her backbone and started speaking without thinking. From her mumbling, I was also able to piece together the whole story of the previous life. She and Blake eloped and were surrounded by a convoy of victims. They were finally knocked off the overpass by the victims and smashed to pieces. Was it her? I knew it. You must have been instigated by someone else to do such a thing. Scarlett's eyes were red. She pointed the finger at Ava, who was standing aside. After all, the biggest difference between this life and the previous one was that Ava was on my side. I blocked Scarlett, who was about to rush over, and pulled out the materials about the inferior building materials and Blake's gambling debts from Ava's bag. He's not gambling for the first time. The hole he dug got bigger and bigger, so he took risks and bought inferior building materials. I glanced at the stunned Scarlett and taunted her. You trusted Blake so much that you were completely fooled by him. Twice. Scarlett randomly flipped through those pieces of evidence. She picked up a photo of Blake in the casino with trembling hands, tears streaming down from the corners of her eyes. I don't know if it was out of hatred or regret. It had nothing to do with me anymore. I signaled Ava to stop the live broadcast. This incident had already been on the hot search. Baishan Company is suspected of using inferior building materials. Blake, the vice president of Baishan Company, is suspected of murder and has been arrested. Ava burst into tears on the spot, saying that her father's wrongs have been righted and her great vengeance has been avenged. After Blake was arrested, due to public opinion, he was directly sentenced to death. To my surprise, during this period, Scarlett didn't call me even once. I originally thought that given her relationship with Blake, she would plead for him more or less. Baishan Company's bidding result was cancelled, and it had to pay a large amount of liquidated damages, which directly broke the capital chain and followed the same path as in the previous life. I was highly regarded by Chenjian, and my rank was promoted quickly. After Ava's wrongs were righted and her vengeance was avenged, she also continued to work in the field of online influencers, helping the public to voice their opinions. Chenjian established a branch company in the province and asked me if I was willing to go and serve as the general manager. I readily agreed. This city held too many memories, good and bad, all mixed together. I wanted to get out of this quagmire. Before leaving, I went to see Blake. He had lost a lot of weight, and his cheeks were scarily sunken. When I saw him, he was already half crazy. He could only mumble. If only I had come back a little earlier. Just a little earlier. The prison guard said he had suddenly become like this and asked me to leave early after seeing him. As soon as I sat down, he seemed to wake up from a dream in a trance. Ryan, help me. I was reborn. I know a lot of things that will happen in the future. I came back too late. Even if it was just a little earlier, I could have. He gritted his teeth, his face full of unwillingness, but without the slightest hint of regret. I was a bit surprised that Blake was also reborn, just a step behind us. However, it was just a surprise. In both lives, he had done all kinds of evil deeds. Being reborn was just a punishment from heaven for him. Before I went to the province, Scarlett gave in and signed a divorce agreement with me. Now that Baishan was on the verge of collapse, it was useless for her to delay any longer. The last time I saw her was at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Scarlett was wearing a wedding dress and holding a bouquet of flowers. Is there really no room for redemption? Since we've been given a second chance at life, shouldn't we give each other another chance? Tears were streaming down her eyes like a string of pearls, and her beautiful face was full of regret. Will you marry me again? Please? I silently shook my head. Bella, who was standing aside, exchanged a glance with Scarlett and then hurriedly knelt down in front of me. Dad, we really know we're wrong. He was about to kowtow to me but was stopped by me. I just found it ridiculous. To avoid divorcing me, Scarlett actually used Bella as a bargaining chip. Even more ridiculous was that Bella wasn't even my child. The moment I got the divorce certificate, the thorns that had been all over me gradually disappeared. Stepping out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, the sunlight was blinding. I felt as if I had been reborn. For the rest of my life, I would no longer live for the Ryan family, but for myself as Ryan. The end.